Hey, good morning. Did you know that every genre of music to come out of the United States of America was created by black people? True story. We created jazz, hip hop, R&B, country, and rock and roll. But you don't have to take my word for it.
Hey, good morning. Always want to say that. Hey, Levert, man, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it, and big fan, and I learned a lot from you. Now, today's topic will be about the origin of rock and roll and pop music as we know it today. We trace back to the music town of Memphis, the land of the Three Kings. Now, historically, Memphis is America's most musical city. After all, it is the home of the Three Kings, the King of the Blues, the King of Country, and the King of Rock and Roll. B.B. King, Johnny Cash, and Elvis all called Memphis their home in their formative years. They all have statues honoring them in Memphis today. And as you'll see, all three can trace their roots back to the same rich soil, black music. Now, let's start this journey into the history of American music by taking a long walk down Beale Street, the musical heart of Memphis. The street itself was founded by a black man, Robert Reed Church. Mr. Church bought up the land around Beale Avenue after yellow fever decimated the area in 1878. In fact, Mr. Church would become the first black millionaire from the South as a result of renovating the neighborhood beginning in 1890. Among many improvements, he built the Grand Opera House, which became the legendary Orpheum Theater. In 1899, he paid the city to create Church Park at the corner of 4th and Beale. The park became a recreational and cultural center where blues musicians could gather around and jam. The oldest surviving black church in Tennessee is Beale Street Baptist Church. NAACP co-founder Ida B. Wells was a co-owner and editor of an anti-segregationist paper called Free Speech, based on Beale Street, at least until her business was destroyed by a white mob. But anyway, in short, Beale Street was super black. It was a hot spot filled with black nightclubs, black restaurants, and black shops. Trumpet player W.C. Handy became famous for his song Beale Street Blues in the early 20th century. In fact, the locals changed the name of Beale Avenue to Beale Street because of the hit song. From the 1920s to the 1940s, Louis Armstrong, Muddy Waters, Albert King, Memphis Minnie, B.B. King, Rufus Thomas, Roscoe Gordon, and other legends of blues and jazz played on Beale Street and helped develop the style that would be named after another W.C. Handy song, the Memphis Blues. So white rock and country legends from Memphis, they were swimming in all that mighty river of black culture when they were coming of age in the 1950s. Now let's start with Elvis, guys. The Presley family then moved to Memphis in 1948. From the ages of 14 to 18, Elvis lived at 185 Winchester Apartment, number 328 in the Lauderdale Courts Projects. On the black side of Memphis, the Presleys paid $35 a month to stay in the low-income apartment complex, which was walking distance from Beale Street. Right? Getting it together here. Elvis immersed himself in blackness. Language, culture, fashion, dance, and of course the music. For example, when Elvis was 17, Big Mama Thornton released a song called Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. Sound familiar? 4 years later, Elvis released the same record, which would be his signature song for the next 3 generations. How about that? Throughout the 1950s, a teenage Elvis Presley often wandered down Beale Street, just looking around. As James Brown recalls, and I quote, "We were friends for a long time, for 20 years. And he told me he'd ride around Memphis, around the streets. He'd come up in all alone at night, ride around on his motorcycle when he was sure the rest of the world was asleep. Just kind of haunting them places he hung around as a kid. Black places." Elvis bought clothes from the same tailor who had been dressing his good friend B.B. King for years. He even went to a black barber. Elvis spoke openly about his love of black gospel music and the Beale Street clubs. Check this out. He even recorded at a studio that was founded to record black artists, Sun Studio. Sam Phillips opened the studio in 1950, hoping to record blues music made by black artists. Music historians don't talk much about that part of the story, though. I wonder why. Instead, they usually repeat the factoid that the first rock and roll single was cut at Sun Studio. There was a tune called Rocket 88 by Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. Well, at least that's the story they tell. The truth is that Rocket 88 was written by Ike Turner. Yeah, that Ike Turner. Ike also played keyboards on the tune, and the so-called Delta Cats were actually Ike's band, the Kings of Rhythm. Here's the truer story. After Ike's band laid down the song, Sam Phillips licensed the record to Chess Records. Right? Sam got the credit for creating rock and roll when the record reached #1 on the R&B charts. Think about that. Jackie Brenston was Ike Turner's saxophonist and lead singer. Ike wrote and played on the song along with his band, and yet somehow Ike is forgotten in the story, but Sun Studios is forever known as the birthplace of rock and roll. The most famous recording session at Sun Studio took place on December 4th, 1956, when Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash recorded a jam session at the studio. They called themselves the $1 Million Quartet. Nobody invited the great blues and R&B artists who had been recording there since the early 50s. Cats like Howlin' Wolf, Junior Parker, Little Milton, B.B. King, James Cotton, Rufus Thomas, Brooke Benton, or Roscoe Gordon. Some of them were friends of Elvis too. Yet they were not invited to the session and are rarely mentioned in the stories about Sun Studio and the roots of rock and roll. As a matter of fact, most people don't even realize that the term rock and roll itself had been black slang since at least the 1920s, and the phrase was originally used to describe blues music at least 10 years before Sam Phillips was given credit for coining the term, and decades before Alan Freed was given credit for popularizing it. Slowly but surely, though, over the past 70 years, both blacks and whites have forgotten the black roots of the term, the music, and the studio where it all began. You're more likely to hear tales about the white artists who performed at Sun Studio, including country legends like Roy Orbison and Jerry Lee Lewis. Turns out country music is black roots too. Take, for example, one of the members of that famous $1 Million Quartet, Johnny Cash. Now, before we get into his story, let's go back a little deeper into our nation's history. Remember the 40 acres and a mule, that were promised to all black people when they were freed from 400 years of captivity after the Civil War? Well, black people never got theirs. However, 500 white families in Memphis were given farms of 20 to 40 acres, along with a mule and a house and a barn, a privy, a cow, a chicken coop, as well as food and supplies to support the family until they harvested their own crop. Each of these white families cultivated their crops on the land promised and delivered by the government. In the winter of 1935, Ray and Carrie Rivers Cash moved into one of those homes with their children, one of whom was a 3-year-old musical prodigy who would grow up to be Johnny Cash. When asked, Johnny named white artists like the Carter Family and Hank Williams as his musical influences, but with a little digging, you find out that the Carters listened to black guitarist Leslie Riddle to develop their style, and you'll learn that black guitarist Rufus T. Tot Payne played black blues and gospel to train the ear of young Hank Williams. T. Tot also taught the country legend how to play the guitar. In other words, even the roots of country are black. Sure enough, Johnny Cash singled out both black blues and black gospel as major influences on his music. It's the music he heard on Beale Street, at the park, on the radio, and in the studio in Memphis. So the next time you listen to hip hop, R&B, rock and roll, or country and Western, remember it all comes from the same source: Black Memphis, black people, black music, black culture. Whether you love R&B, rock, or country, please remember, it's all black. Y'all take care now.